A piece of advice I was given many years ago is always blame it on Jesus. So when it comes to my Christian convictions, particularly the ones that are so countercultural and triggering for people all around us, I want to keep saying it's because I follow Jesus and it's what he teaches. So your issue's really with him, not with me.
Hi again, everybody. Welcome back to The Narrative. Mike Andrews, Aaron Baird, David Mahan coming at you again this week to talk about a lot of things going on in the news. And in some ways, the big story, Trump addressed both houses of Congress last night. It was more spectacle maybe than information. That's kind of how I felt. We've just heard so much about the executive orders. We've talked about them on the show. I don't know that there was a lot new that came out of last night.
No, I think I was talking about this today with a friend, and the biggest thing about all of it, and even just last night, is I think that what jumped out more than anything was just the strategy that he's taking. And we talked about this a little bit with the executive orders, but it is. It's something unlike we've ever seen, which is basically just a blitzkrieg approach to. I mean, just a few days ago, we were talking about everything was the Trump and Zelensky and J.D. Vance meeting in the White House, which I thought J.D. represented Ohio really well in that interaction, but. I mean, there's not even time for these stories to hit a full media cycle before we're jumping on to the next thing. And honestly, I feel like for the most part, it's working out very well for an agenda that I think is one we can support. So yeah, I mean, that was you just to step back and hear a conversation around all the things that have already been done, and it's just March 5th. Or March 4th when he delivered that speech was incredible.
Yeah, and we learned that you can actually throw somebody out for being disruptive. So I'm wondering, can we do that with David on the podcast?
That was hilarious.
Order in
y'all
the
can
podcast.
Throw me out. Look, I take it as a personal day.
Yeah.
So I struggled a little bit. I struggle with the response from it. I struggle with, especially when you talk about Christians that just have to feel like they have to be all in on how he does what he does. I like what he's doing, right? I love the policy. I love, the border being tightened up. I love the foreign affairs stuff, Israel. I just don't like how. And I feel like I don't have to. I don't have to get into the pomp and circumstance of literally pointing to the other side of the aisle and calling names, right? No, I'm not about the guy, waving his cane like, what is he saying anyway? Like, did you?
You have no mandate, is what I
you have no mandate. Okay. Yeah. Get that guy out of there. But I also don't have to like how he does what he does, his rhetoric. And I know people are going to hate me for that because we have to be bandwagon Christians. I want to be the guy that's like the military guy sitting down front. I'm honoring the President of the United States. I'm going to do what we got to do. I care passionately about my country. But no, this is not Jerry Springer. And no, I don't have to get on board 100% with how people do what they do.
By all means, I think that's all 100% true.
Full stop.
But no, not full stop. Not full stop. Because the reality is, and again, we've unpacked a lot of this on the pod already, but there's amazing things that have been done that we didn't think could be done in our lifetime.
100%.
And yes, again, we went after his EO on IVF, right? Like on here. Because yeah, I agree. There's not we don't have to be bandwagoners, and I think a lot of times when you see folks sort of be sycophants and say this man can do no wrong, all of that. Yeah, that's pure nonsense. But in all honesty, there are things that are being unwound right now that I didn't think ever would be possible.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
And so to that end, that makes me really excited. I think the real show of strength and leadership is going to come now now that we're really getting into budget reconciliation. Like how many of these things, the confirmations were one thing, but actually getting some of this stuff done by law. Are we going to actually be able to defund Planned Parenthood? Right? I mean, this is the second time over the last 10 years that pro-lifers have allegedly had control of the House, Senate, and presidency, and we didn't do it last time. And I would argue there wasn't really a serious push on it last time. And so now are we actually going to do that? So this has all been incredible. I think this speech was kind of a good capstone to a show of, for the most part, great and strategic executive authority.
Phase one.
Exactly, right? But now it comes what can be done, big picture, in actually through Congress.
Yeah, and as we start to see things rolling on the state level as well, DEI, something that we've been talking a lot about, and saw over the past week some pretty notable gains for people against DEI in that Ohio State and Target, as a major retailer, both scaling back some of those initiatives.
Which, again, I can't. We were joking about this in our team signal chat. David, are we supposed to shop at Target now or not?
I can't keep up.
David never stopped.
Yeah, so. David.
Target is trash. I'd rather shop at Meijer. Have you seen the gear? They don't even have gear. They have widgets.
These are the hot takes people come to the narrative for, which is like, I'm a Meijer guy.
There is no gear at Target.
There are times that I can sort of prepare myself for what a response is going to be. Yeah. I did not have.
Not seeing the
I did
Meijer
not
off the
have.
top rope.
Yeah, that was.
Meyer's got some Columbia gear, some outdoorsman type stuff.
David going John Cena on Target for anybody.
Yeah. I don't care what y'all do at Target. Yeah. No, but I love the cultural shift piece of this, and I speak about that all the time. We'll talk about that a little bit later, as well. But the cultural shift of not being able to be so hard, on DEI. I mean, granted, the tail of the tape is really going to be months down the line when we see, okay, did these guys just change roles?
Yeah.
Or, did they just morph into some other random program that's just not hit the headlines? Or did they really, cut some of the funding to these positions and these roles? I think we won't know that for a while.
I mean, kind of to what we were talking about before, I kind of say this is phase one of the grand purge of the DEI mindset. I would say sort of a Marxist mindset. This is only the beginning of it, and step one has got to be, hey, let's get the overt stuff gone. To me, there's a broader mindset of the federal government and state government exercising its authority over what taxpayer dollars are used on.
That's right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That to me is the biggest. When you talk about mindset shift, the idea that government just has to close its eyes and send money to various things, that elected officials, have to surrender their appropriators' responsibility and just give money over to leftist institutions to do with whatever they want. Changing that is a big part. But thinking back to our conversation with Rachel O'Brien from Open the Books, and they documented about 200 employees at OSU that were DEI employees, and they reduced 16 staff at OSU on the DEI front. So, it's good to celebrate it, right? We should celebrate it. It's a big win. This doesn't happen without really massive grassroots support, because all of the cultural forces, academia, media, corporate America, all of the money was really behind DEI. The fact that we've brought a lot of this, at least made it politically unpopular, is a major win.
How you feel about all the administrative cuts? People losing their jobs, and have all of them? Did all of them say, hey, you get the severance? It's 8 months before you have to leave or whatever. No, you quit now, retire now, and then you get 8 months of pay. Right? Is that how it works? How y'all feel about that?
Again, to me, as federal employees, it's a net good thing. Yeah. Right? Again, we can have. This is the same type of thing we talk about on the immigration issue. We can have compassion for the individuals who are hurting, and we should, right? But as taxpayers and as people who are trying to have government run as well and serve the most people as possible, I think we should absolutely celebrate.
I'm shocked that we're only hearing one side of it in the media, right? You got these young guys that are crying that they're losing their jobs. Oh, you got 8 months paid. But there was somebody testified in my church who had been praying to be able to be home with her children. And she gave a whole testimony in tears of how thankful she was that she got to retire and got laid off. And but you never hear that piece in the media.
Right.
I mean, a lot of folks out there are like, man, this is the blessing I've been praying for a long
That's
time.
crazy.
Because I hated my job. I hated the environment for all the reasons Trump and everybody, Elon has been talking about.
And think about paying somebody who hates their job as a like this is we don't do good with big numbers in America. So when you have hundreds of thousands of federal employees, and how are you actually holding them accountable? Right? I mean, you were talking about the Elon email earlier today of sending 5 things you did that day.
Yeah, he said it's not about performance; it's about a pulse. We just want to see are these live human beings that are
right.
Is there a human being at the end of this email address?
The way you hear it reported, people are losing their mind over having to do something as simple as that.
Right. No, exactly, and that's which is common for all of us who've really worked outside of a behemoth federal bureaucracy or state bureaucracy.
Responding, eating breakfast, he said, would have saved your job.
Yeah, seriously. Like
I ate breakfast today. Aaron.
That's good. Look at that.
I
actually did not. No, that's a problem in of itself. But like again, I think this is. One of these things, what I love about the sort of going back to the original conversation about the State of the Union address, like the Blitzkrieg approach that is just sort of ripping the Band-Aid on a lot of things has been really good, and DEI has been wrapped into this. Just real quick on the phase 2 of DEI though, this is where the State House, but especially I would say the trustees at these universities, one, they should be responsible for going through and rooting out and making sure our universities, because Senate Bill 1 is likely going to pass. Governor DeWine has indicated he's favorable to sign it. It's up to the trustees then to make sure these universities are doing what the law requires. But bigger picture, it's also up to us to start producing new teachers to take their places, right? That's to David's point. Passing these bills doesn't mean the Marxists go away, right? In I would say probably most cases, it just means they get a new job title or they get transferred. But you can see in the protests, the absolutely unhinged protests on college campuses across Ohio right now, opposing the ban on DEI on college campuses, like these folks are still going to have their jobs, right? I mean, I can go and Maria and I were at we went to OU together, and we were at OU's campus a while ago, and we looked up a professor that we had. I'm going to see if I can find his title because here it is. I'm not going to say his name because I want to protect the innocent, but his research areas are political theory, critical race theory, critical whiteness studies, and
dope.
Politics of silence. Politics of silence.
We could use more science.
Silence.
In politics.
Right? Exactly. But it's like, and this is a tenured professor at a major college, and this guy's not going anywhere with the ban on DEI, right? He's still going to be teaching these types of classes, and we're still going to be funding them as taxpayers. That's the long battle on all of this.
Well, I know I normally try and do some smooth transitions from topic to topic, but I want to come in with my own hot take now, if I can.
Yes, do it, man. Yeah.
Okay. The Oscars are trash and movies are terrible these days.
That's good. We got Myers better than Target, and the Oscars are trash.
No doubt.
Terrible.
Movies.
100%.
Mike's hot take is actually true. David's Meyer.
Have you been to Meyer?
I have been to Meyer. Meyer is a gumbo pot of nonsense.
Have they said anything about DEI? Have you seen a flag in Meyer?
It's not about it's you walk in and you're like,
out your local
why
Meijer.
are the screwdrivers but next to the Kool-Aid? It doesn't make any sense.
Shout out to Meyer.
Well,
Y'all
that's how
send
you
something to your boy.
Exactly. Anyway.
I want Columbia
Anyway.
gear, 50%.
Aside from the fact that the 90s were the greatest decades for movies,
That's
we did
very
have the
true.
Oscars this past week.
Yes.
And
David never misses them. He
Like,
sits and watches
I
everything.
can't tell you the last time I saw one.
There legitimately is no reason to watch the Oscars
Trash,
anymore.
yep.
All the movies that they nominate for anything, they're just patting themselves on the back.
Everything
over
is
how-
like a trans thing, or exactly.
Yeah.
Keep going.
However, one ray of sunshine in this year's Oscars was the acceptance speech that Kieran Culkin, the brother of Macaulay Culkin, gave when he won Best Supporting Actor. Surprisingly pro-life and pro-family. It's like Hope in a Future reached Hollywood or something like that. And
But
basically,
is he still alive, though? Because if I would have put my wife on blast like that in front of everybody, I don't know if I'd have made it home. But I did appreciate what the brother said.
It was a sweet moment. If you didn't see it between the two of them, I encourage you to go watch it. You could tell that she was
feeling it?
She was feeling
Okay.
it. She was feeling it. But essentially what he said was, when I won an Emmy last year, you promised me that we could have more kids. And then when I said that I wanted 4, not 3, you said, well, you got to win an Oscar. And so he tells this to the entire world from the Oscar stage and proclaimed his love for his wife. It was a sweet moment. And I just appreciated it from the standpoint of back when the Oscars were semi-relevant, maybe 10 years ago still or more, there was an actress who won Best Supporting Actor, Best Actress, I don't recall which, but basically got up there and said, I'm here today because I had an abortion. And to hear the other side of that was just so unexpected and refreshing. It was a great moment.
No, I mean, to me, this is when we talk about what do we actually do in response to the Hope in a Future report. This is actually kind of it. This is one of those things that's as important as anything else we talk about. And I still have not come up with a better phrase than changing the social imagination of our kids, right? Because all of the narrative around marriage and having kids is that it's terrible, right? Is that it holds you back. Again, that's what you hear. What you'd hear in the Oscars before is that it's really hard. Is that and the answer to some of those things is it is really hard at times, right? But this is where the Brad Wilcox research just blows it all out of the water, blows all that narrative out of the water. Is that the happiest people, the most fulfilled people are married moms, and the second is married dads, and showing kids, showing the next generation the beauty, the fun, the greatness of being a dad, having kids, is honestly really the most important thing we can do right now to turn the tide here, right? David's wife runs a pregnancy center. Maria volunteers there. Again, you interact with the folks that show up at the pregnancy center. There's no context in many ways of sort of sexual fidelity, marriage, and that sort of stable household being the good life that is attainable, right? Mm-hmm. In many ways, and so, to me, how we shift that, and I think culturally seeing that from stage is powerful. I almost have a challenge of, hey, pastors, when was the last time you celebrated that on your stage? When was the last time your congregation saw that and heard that message? Is
to
what's
be
so
it,
important.
you got to see it, right? Somebody's got to lay down the vision, and that was a beautiful way to lay down the vision of marriage and children and family.
Yeah, and that's a great spot to put a pin in the first segment today. Brought to you by Meijer. Actually, we are not taking sponsorships, in spite of David's repeated insistence on shopping there.
$20 eggs, though.
Well, we're going to take a quick break. We'll come back with a conversation with Sam Allberry, author and theologian. Great conversation. It'll, I think, help provide a lot of context for just where we are as a church and as believers in the issues surrounding gender ideology and sexuality. I've appreciated personally Sam's work throughout the years, and it was a great opportunity to chat with him, and we're excited to share that with you next on The Narrative. Hey, Narrative listeners. Christians in the marketplace today face more unique and challenging threats than ever before. Businesses are following woke capitalism, chambers of commerce are beholden to social justice, and secular activists are chipping away Christians' First Amendment rights. As Ohio's only Christian chamber of commerce, the Christian Business Partnership stands in the gap to advocate for, to educate, and to celebrate Christian business owners. Joining the partnership also allows businesses to provide their employees with healthcare insurance, workers' compensation, and exclusive banking and educational discounts. To find out more and to join, go to cbpohio.org. That's cbpohio.org. And we are back on The Narrative. Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, David Mahan. Pleased to welcome in now Sam Allberry, who grew up in England, where he became a Christian and eventually a church pastor. He's now the associate pastor at Emmanuel Church in Nashville, Tennessee, and is a canon theologian for the Anglican Church in North America. Sam is the author of several books, as well as a fellow at the Keller Center for Cultural Apologetics and co-host of the podcast You're Not Crazy, Gospel Sanity for Young Pastors. Sam Allberry, welcome to The Narrative. It's great to have you here.
I'm glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So I'm going to start with a pretty broad question, Sam, and regarding your work, when you were writing a lot about kind of a theology of the body and about relationships and stuff like that, it felt like there was a void in the church for some of those materials, and that churches were really hungry for that, to have some biblically accurate and gospel-saturated materials to talk about really cultural, complex issues. A few years down the line, how do you think the church is doing on that front? Have we gotten better at those conversations to make sure we're balancing grace and truth as we try and hold out what the Bible actually says about how we're designed and how relationships are designed?
Yeah, I think there's probably yes and no, because the church is a big thing across the land. I'm seeing a lot of churches who I think are engaging these conversations really well, really healthily, really graciously, faithfully. And a lot of this is new conversation. We've not had to have these conversations in recent decades. So this is like a sort of a new thing for us to be wading into. But I see a lot of other churches that are, more adversarial in their posture, and not necessarily being very gracious. So I think it depends where you're looking. But I'm certainly encouraged more than I'm discouraged.
Yeah. Sam, I think for a lot of especially evangelicals, CCV is a Catholic and evangelical organization. I know for a lot of Catholics, the concept, the ideas of theology of the body are pretty, are maybe a little bit better known than in evangelical circles. Could you define theology of the body and maybe speak to why you think it's something that's important for all Christians to have a good understanding of today?
Yeah, you're right. When I was starting to work on that particular project, most of what I was looking at was Catholic, because there just wasn't much kind of evangelical Protestant treatments of this. What we're looking at is, what is the theological significance of our embodiedness? What does it mean for us to be embodied? And obviously, a lot of Catholics have been working on that for a lot longer than some of the rest of us have. Like John Paul II, particularly. But I embarked on that really because as a pastor, I'm seeing so many areas of confusion in our culture, and a common thread with a lot of them is not knowing what our bodies mean. So whether that's gender identity, whether that's sexuality, whether it's body image, transhumanism, AI, all of these things, a common factor is we don't know what our bodies mean. And Scripture has so many rich things to say on this. So it grew out of seeing a pastoral need in the church to go upstream of some of the big discussions and think, if we get a theology of the body in place, we'll then be better prepared to face into some of the conversations that are going on around us.
I love that, because I think we just came out with a big study here in Ohio. We called it our Hope in a Future report. I'm sure you're familiar with Brad Wilcox from the Institute for Family Studies. Brad did this report for us. And it's funny because the longer I've gotten into sort of the conversations around theology of the body, the more I realize how much broader the concept is, even outside of just, I think a lot of times we come across this in the context of abortion, or like you said, transgenderism, maybe same-sex marriage, those types of things. But even just the idea that, we were made with a purpose, our bodies have a purpose to them, and we are, I can't remember the way Ryan Anderson talks about it, but it's like we are souls in bodies, not just souls and bodies, I think is the way he talks about it. but honestly, this whole study comes out and shows this is what out of wedlock childbirth is doing to Ohio, and how child poverty is skyrocketing in our state because kids don't have married dads at homes. And then when we actually start talking about a lot of the policy solutions, where sometimes we see the left go, and even some of the right, that I think is fairly well intentioned, is things around either universal pre-K or sort of child subsidies for childcare, right? Or like childcare from the moment on, right? And again, that's I think a lot of that stuff is well intentioned, but I think it misses a part that, hey, a newborn has a need for their mother. And as we're building it now, sometimes that mom needs to get back to work, and there's nothing we can do about that. They have to provide for themselves. But when we start building out programs to just look at humans as machines and say, how do we allow them to, function in this sort of paradigm, as opposed to saying, well, no, actually, there's something here about that newborn needing their mom. So how can we help encourage that arrangement as best as possible? And that's going to be what's best for them. And to me, that's what Christians bring to the public policy conversation is, no, we understand how humans are made, and we need more than just shelter, food, water, work, right? There's something else that we have a need for. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. It comes down to anthropology. What are we? And until we're clear on that, we're not going to know what we need, how to flourish, and so on. So you're exactly right. And this is the theological need of our age now is a good, healthy, biblical anthropology, because we've so much in our society is trying to transcend our embodiedness rather than recognize the goodness of our bodily limitations. I'm in my late 40s. I'm beginning to feel some of the things that I could do 10 years ago. I can't do as easily now. And
he's had chronic back problems for the last
Your 40s is when the warranty on your body expires. I'm convinced of that, because things just start to not work anymore. But I can already feel the cultural pressure to be thinking of myself as younger than I was and wishing myself to be younger than I am, rather than saying, the way God has designed our human bodies to be, it's good for me to be at this stage of life. Whatever age we are, it's good to be that age. Whatever constraints come upon us physically at any particular stage of life, those are good constraints. We need them. It's not good that we're sick. It's not good that we injure ourselves, but there's a goodness to becoming more physically vulnerable with age. There are things we will learn through that process. There'll be ways in which it'll make us better people by coming to terms with that. So, but I think so much in our culture, and the technology is nudging this way, is trying to sort of make our embodiedness incidental and irrelevant, and for us to be able to break free of the constraints of that or pretend that they're not there.
Yeah, that's an interesting point there, Sam, because I can easily see how in your younger years, you're maybe a little more missionally available because you've got more energy, more stamina, that kind of thing. How does our aging and feeling some of the bodily breakdowns maybe increase our capacity for missional work or discipleship work?
Yeah, I've noticed this with each decade of my adulthood, that there's a playoff between wisdom and energy. In my 20s, I had a lot of energy, but very little wisdom. In my 30s, I was consciously thinking, wow, I'm slightly less dumb than I was in my 20s. Ditto with my 40s. I'm nearly at the end of my 40s. I'd rather have the wisdom than the energy, because I think we get more done with wisdom than we do with just brute force. And I've seen the Lord's faithfulness for more years than I had in my mid-20s. So I think the energy I do have, I'm better able to use with wisdom than if I had a ton of energy that I was just blasting out, without much kind of consideration.
Yeah, that's really good. And I would say I would agree with all of that. But Really appreciate wisdom, but don't try me. I'm 49.
I'm 49 too, brother.
Right?
Yeah.
I mean, by whose standards?
Just for the haters that might be in the room. So we have, and I don't know if you're aware of, I know you do a lot of work in gender ideology, but in Ohio, we've come a long way just in the last few years with pushing back on gender ideology, especially as it pertains to children and young ladies. We're kind of going to hit some of the rest of that here in the next couple of years. And it's been fascinating, Sam, to see the pendulum swing on this, right? Like when I first started with CCV, I was like, man, Lord, can we do anything about this? Like nobody wants to touch this. And then now we got it polling at 60, 70%. We're done with this. But what is just in talking about where you were at the beginning of this conversation, what is the danger of trying to deal with gender ideology without dealing with a biblical sexual worldview or ethic?
Yeah, I think one of the dangers is that we can be trying to do the right thing for the wrong reason.
Yeah.
Or we can be appealing to the wrong motivations in people. I do want people to push back on transgender ideology. I don't want people to be demeaning, dismissive, cruel to transgender people.
Right.
So there may be some parts of the populist backlash that I have to oppose as well as a Christian. So that there are going to be times when as Christians we find ourselves between maybe two groups that don't like us. One is the group whose ideology we're opposing, but the second is the group who thinks it's okay to, demean, insult, attack those people, and we want to uphold their dignity whilst disagreeing with their ideology. So there's things we can appeal to, and I'm seeing this in some of the politics out there that are not noble things to appeal to in these discussions. But it is fascinating. I'm come from the UK, and I think the trans movement has crested in the UK, and there's now so much secular opposition to it,
right,
that you're seeing some partnerships you never would have imagined.
That's right.
15 years ago between some parts of the secular world that we would share very little in common with, but a common cause when it comes to particularly protecting children from some of these things. So there's some interesting dynamics, and I think if Europe has gone further down the secularism route than the States has generally, I think it means that we'll see more of that secular pushback over here, as like we've seen in Europe.
The secular pushback is an interesting one to me because one of my favorite podcasts, besides ours and yours, of course, is Barry Weiss's Honestly podcast. And Barry Weiss is a Jewish lesbian woman, right? But she does great news interviews, all that kind of stuff. However, on the trans issue, she's very much opposed to men and women's sports, and opposed to transgender procedures on kids. But very regularly will have a man on who says he's a woman, as a news commentator. And the secular argument, and again, this is one of these things, I think it goes to the whole, when we try to, it's my broader issue with social conservatism, quote unquote, social conservatism, as opposed to a Christian sort of ethic on public policy, is that when we try to take these issues one by one, they can kind of collapse into themselves. Like Barry's position, the secular position on transgenderism amounts to, give kids time to, develop and let them make this decision for themselves. But ultimately, it's actually not a scientific one. It feels like ultimately, like what they argue, what I've heard Barry and this man that says he's a woman on the podcast argue is that, well, if they go through enough surgery and they really believe it and they really commit to it long enough, then they are trans. And again, it's just not sort of logically consistent. So because ultimately the DNA has not changed. The body is still the same body, right? It's now, again, it's not that this man has become a woman. It's that this man has removed his genitals, right? And that doesn't make him not a man anymore. And so I guess how should we, like, how do you view how we should make these alliances, make these, partnerships with folks who aren't sort of biblically aligned with us on certain things, and how should we look at those things?
Yeah, I think there's a place to. It's not the whole show for us. We have many fronts on which we can oppose something like transgender ideology, but I think it's more compelling to a secular person if we're using secular arguments to defend our position and to make our case, using moral intuitions that they already hold to argue for what we're saying. Now, the argument you've just mentioned, it's a good one, but it's a fragile one.
Yeah.
It's not a very solid one, but it's something. It's part of the conversation. It's interesting. I've heard LGB people pushing back against transgender ideology because, again, for them, embodiedness is significant to their sexual identity. They're not. There was a big rift in the UK between the LGB and the T within Stonewall UK, and the organisation ended up splitting because gay people were trying to say, listen, I'm attracted to the same sex, not to the same gender identity.
Mm-hmm.
And trans folks were saying, well, that's transphobic. You should be willing to date a transgender man. And the gay people were saying, no, you're being homophobic because I'm attracted to someone with the same genitalia as me, the same bodily sex as me, not the same gender identity as me. And the thing split open. There's a separate organization now, LGBT Alliance.
And there was no king in Israel. And they just
yeah, but it's interesting because there's some common cause on aspects of this discussion. But part of the challenge and opportunity of being Christians is to try to find ways of commending God's wisdom in a world that doesn't share our presuppositions. And science can help us to some extent in terms of pointing to, mental health, flourishing of individuals, those kinds of things. But for us, they are reflections of the bottom line. They're not themselves the bottom line. The bottom line is what we know to be true theologically. But there are ways in which, and I think I'm stealing this phrase from Dr. Al Mohler, ontology always trumps autonomy. And so at some point, you can self-identify as whatever you like, and you can add or subtract to your body as much as you like, but your ontology is going to make its presence felt.
Mm.
And that's one of the lines of argument I try to use on this. When someone is trying to work out how much anesthesia you need, or whatever the word is, for you to undergo a procedure, they're not interested in that point in your self-identity. They need to know what your DNA is, what your, whether you are male or female, and those kinds of considerations, because that's when the rubber hits the road and it's your biological sex that comes into play, not your sense of self-identity.
Culturally, while we're seeing this huge gender ideology push, and now hopefully we've got the apex of it and we're heading down the other side of the mountain. But before that, we had the same-sex marriage debate. The body of Christ seemed like everybody was pretty much on board for the most part at that point. But now it seems like, I've talked to believers that, oh no, this trans thing is crazy. But same-sex marriage, with two people doing their own, privacy of the bedroom is their business. Do we see, or do we anticipate a shift in same-sex marriage, or is that just a done issue in America, specifically in the body?
Yeah, I think, well, within the church, I hope as we get better at teaching into these things, speaking into these things, I hope the Christian community will be more clear on its, the position of Scripture and the church and those sorts of things. Whether we will see a kind of a cultural pendulum swing back the other way? I don't know. I suspect not, apart from the work of God, because thinking about it just from a secular viewpoint, it's one of the issues with transgenderism is you're actually asking everyone to get in on your fiction. There's a difference between saying I've decided to self-identify as a woman, and then saying all of you have to now identify me as a woman. That is putting an obligation on everybody else. One of the compelling arguments in favor of same-sex marriage was this is just about two people in the privacy of their own lives. And to some extent it was, although there's always then been additional, you have to be forced to affirm it and so on. But it's a much more transgender ideology is far more intrusive because it actually affects your child's restroom, your child's locker room. It impinges on all of us to a much greater extent than same-sex marriage did. Now, it may be that in the rolling back of some of the transgender stuff, people will start to rethink some of the same-sex marriage stuff as well. And I think that, again, there's a case to be made for the wisdom of God's design that a child needs a biological mother and a father and a mother. It's interesting. I was talking with someone recently about there was some corporation and it came out that the entire board of directors was male, and there was an outcry. People were saying that's not right. You've got to have a woman in there. You need diversity. And I was trying to say, if that's true of a boardroom, why would it not be true of the most consequential human relationship, which is a marriage?
Write that down, Mike.
Yeah, right.
So again, there's a secular argument we can use in defense of the biblical view of marriage. And it may well be these things often take time to play out. Wisdom is justified by her children in Matthew 11. And I think when we've lived with the repercussions of same-sex marriage for a generation or two, that may lead to a wider rethinking of is this good on every front in the way that we thought it would be? Just as the receipts have come in for the sexual revolution, and people are more hesitant now in the secular world about some of the things that we've assumed for many years. So some of it is a time issue, I think. But it's always, I'm always thinking with my secular friends, what in their own worldview can I appeal to that will help them see the wisdom of how God has designed us to be?
Yeah. I mean, that's the in some ways you kind of described earlier, the T is disconnected from the LGB in terms of worldview. There's other ways that there is some foundational things that they share in sort of the self-actualization view and kind of you are what you feel kind of mindset. And it's funny that the more, to your point, that the extremes of the sexual revolution are being exposed, the more almost same-sex marriage becomes untethered from the rest of them. And it's the sort of the underpinnings of it are just, but it is, to your point, politically speaking, it's become a third rail for a lot of people that it's hard to talk about. Speaking of third rails and speaking of things that Christians are somewhat politically homeless on today, and also something that evangelicals are kind of catching up to Catholics on in many ways. IVF is when I think about theology of the body today and where this conversation is most pressing. This is another area that I feel like is very much pressing today. As the Southern Baptists came out with a really strong statement about a year ago, I think, on IVF. It is a question that I think it's a little bit like the transgenderism conversation too, where just sort of experientially, I'm seeing more and more pastors get approached by congregants on this topic, right? Transgenderism early on was something that was just maybe they were seeing in the news on the coast, but now people in our congregations were dealing with this with their kids. We see the same thing happening with IVF. What is theology of the body? How does the theology of the body broadly should shape our thinking around IVF today?
Yeah, I have to confess it's not an issue I've studied enough about. And it's interesting. I was just, as you were saying that, it made me realize the only times IVF have come up for me in a local church context are where couples are sharing that they've already embarked on the process and it's a done deal,
Yeah.
rather than we're considering, what do you think about IVF? Can you give us some guidance on it? It's a, by the way, we've decided to do this. So I think the first thing I want to say to Christians is think about it. Study the arguments, not just for it, but the arguments against it. And there are good voices out there for us to listen to on this. Don't just assume that because something can be done that it's the right thing to do. And theology of the body plays into it because the body has a telos, it has a goal and a purpose and an outcome. And we need to be going with the grain of what the body is for, not just what we can use it for or what it might do for us. But I need to go and do some thinking on that. You've reminded me that that's an ethical issue I've not spent enough time considering.
Well, if I may recommend, Katie Faust has done some good writing, and I think my wife at the Colson Center has done some good writing on it as well. Maria Bear. So there's
our
my
favorite bear.
Shameless, yeah, everyone's favorite bear around here. Anyway,
I'll check it out. Yeah.
Well, as much as these are cultural issues and theological issues, Sam, as we engage, there's also an opportunity for the gospel to come into play. So as you've written about this, as you've engaged with debate about this, as you have maybe counseled people pastorally on these things, how could you offer some advice on where we can apply the gospel and how it comes into play in these conversations?
Yeah, I think one obvious way is the way we have the conversation should be a reflection of I always, even if I'm having a spirited disagreement with someone on one of these kinds of issues, particularly if it's someone who's not a Christian believer, I nevertheless want them to feel like any interaction they've had with me, they have felt dignified through having it. So there's been a way I've disagreed with them that has been different to how they see disagreement going on in the world around us. In other words, I want to try to model to them their worth as a human being made in God's image. The secular discourse right now is if I disagree with you, I get to demean you and I get to look down on you. I don't want anyone to ever feel that way when I'm having a discussion. And it has happened at times when someone has said, I feel like really respected and understood by you. And I'll say that's my Christian faith. That's Jesus treats us in a way that we then seek to treat one another in the same way. He's come to be our servant and to serve us, and that makes us people who want to serve others. So I think sometimes just the manner of how we engage these discussions can be salty in the Christian sense. But as well, I want to speak about who Jesus is and why he came. And when someone says, why do you believe what you believe about the definition of marriage? My first answer is because that's what Jesus does. And I follow him. So if you want to change my mind on my opposition to same-sex marriage, you have to change my mind on who Jesus is. Which I want them to know that, because I then want them to look at who Jesus is. Because if they start going down that road, I'll probably see them in church at some point before long. So a piece of advice I was given many years ago is always blame it on Jesus. Okay. So when it comes to my Christian convictions, particularly the ones that are so countercultural and triggering for people all around us, I want to keep saying it's because I follow Jesus and it's what he teaches. So your issue's really with him, not with me.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. Well, Sam, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for all your work, for taking the time to talk with us today. Is there anything that we need to be on the lookout from you? Any books coming up or stuff like that? Or just in general, where could people stay in touch with you and follow your work?
Yeah, I mean, my books end up on Amazon and the usual book places. Most of my preaching is here at my Church Emmanuel, Nashville. I'm just starting some work, some teaching, and hopefully some writing on a Christian approach to the environment. So hopefully at some point in the next year or so, there'll be some stuff on that coming out.
So you're just all in on the controversial issues is basically what you're saying.
Exactly.
Well, Sam Allberry, this has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today on The Narrative. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Narrative, presented by CCV and produced by Wessler Media. If you found today's episode insightful, leave us a review or rating and subscribe anywhere you get your podcasts. We're your hosts, Mike Andrews, Aaron Baer, and David Mahan, and we'll see you next time on The Narrative.